Floydism. Floydism is what I call the point at which the overwhelming evidence is so undeniable that action must be taken. That something has to change, that enough is enough. Floydism has got the people on the street in droves all over the world.
London, Sydney, Seoul, Tunis. The outrage over the death of George Floyd is global. Defying lockdown measures or foregoing government advice, still they came in their hundreds of thousands, calling for an end to police brutality and institutional racism.
And I'm going to share my observation of two protests that I attended, one at Parliament Square on the 6th of June and the other at the US Embassy on the 7th of June. Both of these protests fall under the banner of Black Lives Matter. For some, this is a toxic brand funded by George Soros and therefore should not be trusted. For others, Black Lives Matter isn't radical enough and needs a deeper spiritual and cultural identity for it to be purposeful. Whichever side you're on, one thing you have to agree on: Black Lives Matter has the world's attention. These protests took place in London, a cosmopolitan city that speaks over 300 languages. 37% of the population is born outside the UK, and 13.3% make up the black population within London. The West Midlands, it's 3.3%, and in the North East, it's 0.5%. London has also been at times the epicenter of both the lockdown resistance and COVID-19. All of these have a bearing in some way, I'm sure, on the protests. So what are my observations? People came from every direction. I took the tube to Parliament Square, and on the journey there were just loads of young people talking about politics, policing, social orders and so on, and it was nice to see that actually. When I went to the US Embassy, it was equally a lovely journey, but I went on bicycle and I ended up with waves of cyclists making their way to the protests, sporting their banners as they bobbed and weaved in the traffic. I'd never seen so many black cyclists, to be honest. Cycling has become its own revolution as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. There were lots of white people carrying Black Lives Matter banners. This felt surreal to see so many white people standing up about the ill treatment of black people. Most of the black people carried placards saying Black Lives Matter, or Let Kings Live, or F the police. The theme from the black people was, let us be free to take part in society without being treated as a threat. The more radical ideas, such as Britain is racist to its core, down with capitalism, and teaching black history is the future of the world, were carried by white people. In these cases, there was a definite sense that the system needed to be completely overhauled. The promise of not being killed by police and allowed to move freely wasn't enough. The system needed changing. Whilst politicians are easy prey, I was taken aback by the palpable hatred towards Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. The press drew comparisons of Johnson and Churchill in the Brexit elections. We'll fight them on the beaches type of attitude. To this group of protesters, the correlation between Churchill and Johnson is proof enough that he should not be leading the country. However, we are outside the election period, and people's views are known to change when it comes to choosing between their livelihood and fighting racism, for example. Will they remain as committed to fighting white supremacy at the time when they have to cast their vote? Johnson can also be an easy target for people to point their finger at. It's harder to accept that white supremacist ideas have been internalized by all of us. For white supremacy to work, we've had to, on some levels, accept the ideas, accept those principles. But pointing to oneself is far harder than it is to point at a politician. The strength of white hatred towards a system, coupled with the strength of their anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist message, got me asking the question, do they know what they're asking for? Are they really willing to give up their position of privilege? Because if they are serious about pulling down the white supremacist structures, it will also mean giving up the perks that come along with being white. But spare a moment for all these white people who are here. They will have internal fights within their family, with their brothers, sisters, cousins, and parents. Changing attitudes is as much about changing families' thinking as it is about fighting politicians. We've had many white people stand up against the maltreatment of black people over the centuries, but the reset button to white rule has always been pressed once things die down. Will this time be any different? I saw the LBGT placards from the white LBGT community saying Black Lives Matter. The black LBGT placards were stating that Black LBGT Lives Matter. Their statement felt misplaced, insensitive, and self-centered in a time when we should all stand with one voice. Over the 2 days, the majority of the people who attended were under 35 years of age, which was disappointing that the older generation, who have so much to say about the younger people and so much knowledge about the system, were not there. Question: how will the older heads make a difference if they don't get out on the streets? The young voices were definitely committed, sometimes slightly inaccurate, but 100% willing to challenge police tactics, funding, and tackling racism. I was moved by the sense of injustice in young people. Their pain told me that too little has changed for black people over the decades. Black men in particular are still under systematic oppression that isn't always easy to identify. Small children were low in numbers, but it was warming to see them, like this father with his 2 children, making their views known. It brings home the cost of white supremacy, which is akin to the taking or ownership of young lives just as they're starting out on their journey. Hearing people call out George Floyd's name in the thousands in unison is something I won't forget. And despite the days that have passed since George Floyd has been murdered, the anger of the crowd was still very much at the surface. I've personally never seen so many white people being angry about the ill treatment of black people. Never. Apart from the sound of close body chatter, footsteps, in a time when we were meant to be observing social distancing, the sound of the protest was a mix of Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come, Bob Marley's Natural Mystic, and Garnet's Silk Chant.
It was white as snow in summer. The hill of God,
all in all, these were good-natured events, where like-minded people came together to make a joyful sound on a somber topic, and it worked. In years to come, people will be talking about the marches. You can ask what effect the lockdown and COVID-19 had on the marches, and you can question the long-term motivation of some of the people in regard tackling white supremacy. But this protest felt different. There is a stronger determination for things to change in specific areas, a greater will to take on white supremacy, and a real disgust of how George Floyd and many other black people have been treated at the hands of the police. One thing that cannot be doubted is the sincerity of those who attended. There are three moments that really capture the protest for me. One of a Rastaman making his voice known, a voice that has been ringing out for centuries. The second, of a group of young black radicals who are demanding change from an Afrocentric standpoint. And this banner stating that teaching black history is a means of changing the world for the better.
Included below are related links to this discussion. Please share, comment, and subscribe. And remember, talk the thing.